welcome to the Preemie Chats, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, or CPBF. We are a charitable organization, and our mission is to empower families of premature babies through support and education. This Preemie Chat series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpreemies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. And today we're going to talk about the lives of children born preterm and what do parents think is a bad outcome. When a baby is born preterm, parents want to know what the future will look like for their child. Doctors use the research from outcome studies to guide these important conversations and to make critical health decisions. However, preterm birth outcomes studies and clinical follow-up have traditionally focused solely on brain development and outcomes definitions that were created by doctors without any input from parents and what they think is meaningful and important. In this Preemie Chat series, Preemie Chats today, Lindsay Richter will share the results of a study that created clinical scenarios describing 18-month-old children displaying what would be considered a bad outcome and ask parents if they would rate each scenario as severe or not. This is going to be a very interesting conversation. And I have here joining me live from Vancouver, Lindsay, who is the National Coordinator of the Canadian Neonatal Follow-Up Network, ONFUN. She facilitates collaboration in research, data collection, and knowledge translation to improve the quality of care and long-term outcomes of children seen in neonatal follow-up programs across Canada. She completed her Master of Science at the University of British Columbia. Her thesis examined the health outcomes of babies born early, following spontaneous and clinician-initiated delivery in Canada and United States. During her studies, she received the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute Outstanding Achievement Award at the UBC Friedman Award for Scholars in Health. As a Friedman Scholar, Lindsay helped to establish a national knowledge mobilization network. Lindsay is passionate about implementation of research evidence and patient partnerships to improve the care of premature babies and their families. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us here today. You know I'm very passionate about this topic, and I can hear the results of your research.
Thank you very much, Fabiana. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of our Parent Epic team and share some of our results from a very exciting study.
That's wonderful. And for all of you watching us live today on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, please do send your comments, your questions, and we're going to address them at the end of Lindsay's presentation. Lindsay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as mentioned today, I'll be talking about lives of children born preterm. What do parents think is a bad outcome? So when a baby is born premature, parents want to know what the future of their child may look like. So parents will have questions, have concerns, and will want to know what the future may hold. And we acknowledge that each baby and each child is so unique and so diverse. And without a crystal ball to really see into the futures, doctors and researchers do their best to answer these questions about the outcomes of prematurity using data from clinical follow-up and population-based studies. So what are outcomes of prematurity and what does this really mean? So doctors use research from outcome studies to guide these important conversations and make important healthcare decisions. However, as mentioned, preterm birth outcome studies and clinical follow-up focus primarily on brain development and definitions that were created by doctors. And we're really missing that input from parents on what they think is meaningful and important. So do parents really know and understand what their doctors are telling them about outcomes of prematurity? And are we measuring the right outcomes here? So a bit of background in the Canadian context. So I'm the National Coordinator of the Canadian Neonatal Follow-Up Network, or CNFUN. And CNFUN is a collaboration between neonatal follow-up programs in Canada. And within ONFUN, we've agreed on a standardized health assessment at 18 to 21 months of corrected age. And this is done for all children that are born very preterm at less than 29 weeks in Canada. So this information is really important for ONFUN to report on the health and development. And it's these results that healthcare providers combined with research that they use to counsel parents and plan for these babies and their needs. So traditionally, ONFUN has used medical definitions to describe what can be called severe health outcomes. And these are based on the hearing and vision at this 18-month visit that they come into clinic for. They use information about growth, health resource utilization, and then also cerebral palsy status and severity, and then development that was measured using something called a standardized assessment called the Bailey Scales of Infant and Toddler Development. And this is used to assess motor, so how muscles are used, how you use your muscles, cognitive and problem solving, thinking for these children using the standardized test or assessment, and then language abilities of the children at 18 months. But the way that we've traditionally classified these health outcomes is very standard as what we do is research is we categorize it into several categories. So the first one being what is considered severe, and the other one being mild, moderate, or no neurodevelopmental impairment. But what we do is we use a composite outcome. So we put all of these factors listed under severe, whether it be one or more of the following, and use that to define an overall severe health condition of these children. And many follow-up networks do this. We've traditionally used these definitions in annual reports, in research. And again, the rates of these severe conditions are what is used to make critical healthcare decisions. But maybe we should rethink the way that we're looking at these current health and outcome measures. So potentially there are some problems. We know that doctors and researchers have decided this category as severe that we're using for research. But would parents categorize their child differently? Maybe the term severe is not something that parents really view and identify with, but this is the term that we're using in our research. Secondly, as I mentioned, these outcomes are combined and they're treated all as equal and of equal severity. But would parents really view each outcome with the same severity as we currently have them ranked? So measuring outcomes of preterm birth is really important because this is how we improve perinatal health and outcomes for these babies that are being preterm. And this information is so important for parents and healthcare providers. However, despite the importance of all of this, there's still no consensus of how to measure, define, or report these outcomes. And in fact, parents have actually never been asked which outcomes they perceive to be important. So we received some informal feedback from parents that challenged the ONFUN definition of severe health condition. And that's kind of what brought up the project that I'll be mainly talking about today, is a large overarching project called Parent Epic. So Parent Epic is our research team of Parent Epic belongs to the patient-oriented research network called ChildBright, the Child Health Initiatives Limiting Disability, Brain Research Improving Growth and Health Trajectories. So this all involves funding that's used for a group of studies that involve parents and defining outcomes that are meaningful to these parents. And we have several aims within Parent Epic and our project here. And in collaboration with the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, we're working to identify these outcomes that are meaningful to parents. And there's several steps in this process. So the first step, which I believe has been presented previously to parents, is that we were looking at the correlation between parents' categorization of their own health of their child's preterm status at this 18-month visit and the current ONFUN categories. A second step is a large step that's actually broken down to A, B, and C, and we're exploring parents' perceptions on the impact of preterm birth, the severity of single and multiple health conditions, and ideas on how to communicate better with parents on this outcome information while they're in the NICU. And lastly, in step 3, we're actually planning, which I'll get into shortly, is how we're going to be revising what we collect through ONFUN and at these standardized evaluations, and how to incorporate parent-identified meaningful outcomes. So the Parent Epic Project, what I'll be talking about today is one piece of a larger puzzle, and we're using a mixed method strategy to identify these early childhood outcome measures that are meaningful to parents of children born very preterm. So Parent Epic Step 2C is just one part of this larger puzzle, and it is led by Dr. Ann Sinnis and an amazing team from actually across Canada, with collaborations from parent partners, experts in the field, neonatologists, as well as developmental pediatricians, and we engaged several summer students in this work as well. So with this work that I'll be talking about today, primarily it was Amar Preet, who was a summer student we had last year that was working on this project alongside myself and the rest of the team. And we think it's really important to kind of share this information now, and let me just dive right into it. So the objectives of this study was to use clinical scenarios, basically descriptions on the components of the current ONFUN definition of what would be considered severe health outcomes. So we did this with 2 main objectives in mind. The first one was to find out whether parents and other key stakeholders, so people that have maybe caretakers of a child that was born preterm, people that were born preterm themselves, and we would have them rate each scenario as severe or not. And then the second piece of this is to determine whether the components, as I listed, that they're all combined, if they are of equal severity. So we use this term severity a lot, and we wanted to know if they're really considered to have the same weight and same importance based on parent and stakeholder perspectives. So in terms of how we did this, this study took the collaboration from many individuals, and we co-developed 10 clinical scenarios and 1 control describing a child at 18 months of age, and they were born preterm. And these children, the scenario is based on the ONFUN definitions of what would be considered severe. The development of these scenarios went through 3 rounds of feedback with clinicians, including physicians, nurses, occupational therapists, psychologists, speech language pathologists, and audiologists, providing feedback to make sure that they represent what we would be seeing at the 18-month visit if it would be defined as a severe outcome. And then we also engage parents to give feedback to make sure that they understand each of the scenarios. Was the length appropriate? Was it okay? How many scenarios should each parent in our survey answer? And then would they suggest any other changes to be made? So once we've gone through an iterative process to develop each of the clinical scenarios, we created a survey. And that's where I'll be presenting the results today. So initially, we were distributing the survey to parents that were in British Columbia as they came in for their visits, the follow-up visits, during their clinic visits for these children that are born very preterm. So we're going to ask these parents to participate, fill out the survey, and see whether they would rank it as severe or not. But as we started recruiting participants to participate and complete the study in Vancouver, recruitment was abruptly halted with the pandemic. So our research team needed to pivot slightly and take a bit of a detour on our route here. So what we did is we switched to virtual and engaged in the snowball method. So as a result of the disruption in the clinic visits due to the pandemic, we devised a way to still share the survey and share it more broadly and widely with parents across Canada, as well as parents internationally. So this was only made possible through creating a link to the survey that was actually shared through parent stakeholder partners, including the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, Preemie Quebec, also with the Child Bright Network and our ONFUN online platforms. We were able to share this initial link, and responses ended up snowballing as parents could and parents and stakeholders can share the link, engage more people, have their friends respond to the survey, and it kept growing and growing and growing. So quickly just wanted a huge shout out and thank you to Canadian Premature Babies Foundation for being involved in the distribution of this survey, and many of the parents watching may have actually participated. So thank you. Thank you for bringing, helping us pivot with the pandemic. So we collected information through this online additional survey from April 2021 and extended it till the end of June 2021 as well. So from this survey, we had 827 participants. 62 of those were parents that were seen at neonatal follow-up clinic in Vancouver prior to the pandemic. And then once we started with the snowball method, we engaged parents across Canada, 442 parents that were from across Canada, and then 323 parents that were from across the world internationally. So we had parents complete the survey in both English and French, and we made sure that the majority of participants were able to respond either in either language. And then we had from the international sample, we had parents that were living in the United States, United Kingdom, France, and around the world. So this here is just an example of, this would be a typically developing child, a scenario that would be showing a typically developing child. So for example, Tasha is an 18-month-old child. She can see and hear normally. She walks, runs, and moves like other children her age. She learns, plays, and explores the environment like other children her age. And she can follow simple directions and use words like other children her age. So as part of the survey, you'd get one scenario that looks like this. And this was kind of serving as a control to see where parents would rank this typically developing child. And then we'd compare that to how they were rating the other scenarios that ranged in diversity. So for example, here's another example. Jamie was an 18-month-old or is an 18-month-old child. He can sit with support and roll and creep on his stomach. He has stiff legs and will very likely use a wheelchair for longer distances at school. He can see and hear normally. He learns like other children his age, and he likes to play with other children. He can follow simple directions and use words like other children his age. So this would be representing a child with cerebral palsy. So then after presented with a scenario, parents and participants would be invited to answer a question, two simple questions. The first one being, if 0 was the worst possible health and 10 was best possible health, where do you think child's name would fit in the scale? So they could rate it from 0 to 10 and see really what the severity of that clinical scenario would be. So the results of this were really interesting. So we found that the severity rankings by the participants ranged from 6 to 10. And again, 0, so if the spot in the middle of the figure here would have been the worst possible health, or what we'd expect to maybe be severe. But what we're seeing is the participants are ranking children with nothing lower than a 6 out of 10, with 10 being best possible health. And several of these clinical scenarios were actually ranked quite high, so 7, 8. For hearing impairment was an 8. Cerebral palsy was a 7. Visual impairment was a 6. So what we can see is that you can also see that the typically developing child, which is the one on the top with no impairment, was rated at 10. But you can still see that many of the parents are still ranking these scenarios as not that severe and pretty close to best possible health. So the next question that we asked these parents and participants was, what does the child's, does this case represent a severe health condition? So yes or no. So this was a simple question. And what we found was really interesting as well. We found that for the majority of the vignettes that were representing what would be considered a severe health condition, less than 50% of the respondents perceived it actually to be severe. So cognitive delay, which is really about problem solving, and thinking. It was classified as severe by the smallest proportion, so about 4.6% of respondents, and a combined scenario where the child would have cerebral palsy and language delay. This was rated as severe, but it was only by the largest proportion being 55% of parents. So not 100% of parents, or even close to that, were thinking that these scenarios that are supposed to be describing something that we would consider as researchers or doctors as a severe health condition, many of the parents do not really consider those to be severe. So with that, I can talk for a long time about this project, but just kind of wrapping it up in terms of some conclusions that we have found so far and we're discussing with our team. So the first one is that our results found that the clinical scenarios were rated with scores ranging from 6 to 8 on a scale of 0 to 10, which are all significantly different from a typically developing child. But we did see that parents and stakeholders don't see each of these clinical scenarios describing the definitions as being severe. Secondly, we did find cerebral palsy and language delay combined in a scenario that was perceived as the most severe health condition. But again, it was not 100% of parents that were believing this. We did see that thinking problem solving was perceived to be the least severe health condition. And then lastly, the big outcome that comes from this is that current definitions that I was describing on the first slides there, they need to be changed, and they need to incorporate a stakeholder's perspective or parents' perspectives. We show that the different components that were used in this large combined outcome do not bear the same values based on the stakeholder perspectives. And we also found that perceptions of severity varied among the people that were responding, and they were consistent with the subjective nature of the term severe. So really, to avoid the challenges of using severe, maybe an alternative can be used, so using objective descriptors or something along those lines. But really, the take-home message from this study, which is again just a piece of a larger puzzle here, really understanding what is meaningful to parents, is that severe health outcomes that are defined by doctors are not really rated as severe by the majority of parents and stakeholders from our study. So in neonatal follow-up research and for preterm outcomes, the outcomes were selected by researchers without the consideration of what parents or families consider to be important or impactful. But when parents are just sharing in the decision-making for their child, they need the right information that is understandable to make the best decision for their child's future. So therefore, we want to engage stakeholders and therefore identifying which outcomes to measure, how to describe them, and how to communicate them with patients and parents. So I just kind of want to leave with a question. So now that we've kind of rethought and redefined outcomes of prematurity, and our findings show that we do need to revise these in our current data collection and be more cautious on the use of the term severe, where do we go from here, and where does the future hold? So and that's where we want to get parents more engaged and more involved, and I'm excited to see where this goes from here. And with that, I just want to thank all of our funders, all of our parents that have been engaged in this work, Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, Child Bright Network for funding the study, and all of my mentors for helping and supporting me along the way. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Lindsay, thank you so much for sharing your work and the results of this first piece of the puzzle. So where do we go from here? Because this seems to be like such a meaningful work for families. From your experience, what you learn, why is this important for families, and where are we going with this?
This is important for families because this is the discussions that they're having with doctors. This is the discussions where they're making important healthcare decisions. And this is also discussions where parents are understanding what the future's going to look like for their child. So when we're having these discussions from the get-go in the research, when we're informing the information that we're giving to parents, we need parents at the table to be part of that and to tell us what, to identify what's most important, what we're missing. So as part of the study, we primarily have been looking at brain development, but parents are saying that there's so much more that they want to look at in terms of their child's future. So respiratory outcomes, they want to know the sleeping, feeding, all of these outcomes that we don't typically report on and communicate to parents. Those also should be highlighted because they've been highlighted by parents. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of times it's caused so much stress for families, right? The feeding issues that our babies have, the sleeping issues. There's so much more that we are not really talking to families unless the family comes, bring the issue up to the healthcare team, and then we address it. But it's not something that is often discussed. So we have a lot of comments here. Let me start with a comment here from Crystal. Crystal, thank you so much for joining us. My feelings regarding the severity level of my son's diagnosis is so hard to determine for me as a parent because it's so multifaceted. And I have to, in a lot of ways, I agree sometimes with Crystal sometimes, because my son also had a range of health conditions that sometimes feel, right? I also had this, how do you classify? How do you determine what it is? So have you heard this from other parents? How is the perception of parents regarding the severity?
Yeah, it's hard. And we had to really simplify it kind of in this study of ranking on a scale of 0 to 10. And I know and acknowledge that does not capture the complexities of each individual child, does not capture what the severity, how that impacts like quality of life, which is another outcome we don't measure all that often, especially at 18 months of age. So I think going forward, it's important to have not just the severity and kind of more of the negative or bad. I don't like using the word like bad or severe because there's so much that goes into each individual child and their quality of life and the way that they move in the world. But it's important to also see what other aspects of the child's future can we identify too. So we've been looking at parents have identified more positive outcomes as well. So parents are able to see what would be severe or bad, but also the good, like their child is happy, the child can, is engaging with friends or family, the child brings their personality into the lives of these parents. So I think that it's hard to capture that in a simple definition that's put into a research study. And I think having more kind of objective measures, but then also being able to identify what, how complex it really is. And you can't really just put a number to the severity. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is a very complex issue as well, right? Because if the child, we always talk about the disability, the perception of the society with disability. Is this a bad outcome? Is this a good outcome? Because the way people perceive disability to be, right? A lot of times when I started going out with my son in a wheelchair, he's a child, people come and say, sorry that your child has the cerebral palsy or your child is in a wheelchair. And that really hurts me because, okay, why are you saying sorry? It's like saying sorry for his own existence, right? But I think that it comes all together at the end of the day, how we actually break news to families, how we talk to families about it, because it does put us on a different path, right? That's how we should learn how to celebrate our differences and the challenges and whatever comes with it. Because nobody ever asked me if my son makes us happy, right? Or is happy, right? Because I think that is like, it's harder to measure, but it's something that we should be talking about.
Yes, it's harder to measure. And that's kind of what we're moving forward to in the next step of this project, is identifying what measures are out there and how can we kind of quantify it in a way that still we can create baselines for research and be able to communicate with parents better, but then also understand that there's certain things you can't really quantify, but there are scales that are out there. So we've compiled, we have several working groups that are focused on these outcome measures that we've listed that are different from what we are currently collecting within the database. So each of these working groups are currently together trying to identify what outcomes, for these outcomes, what measures are out there? How can we integrate that in a way that's feasible, flexible, but not too demanding on the parents? No parent wants to be filling out exhaustive survey for every type of outcome that possibly could have at each appointment, because that's more of a burden for parents, but we still want to be able to get this information. So what's the best way to do that, and how can we make it easier and make it, but still you have to balance between facilitating it, but also having it be very meaningful and important.
Right. No, and the group doing this work is incredible, because there's just amazing advocates from across Canada with a range of experiences, doctors who are also preemie parents. So it is such a great group to work with. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results in the future. So we have a question here from Ashley. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. Former 24-weeker here. Have you considered asking former adult preemies what impacts them as they have gotten older and what they needed growing up? This is an excellent question, Ashley. Thank you so much for asking.
Yes, I love that question, and it's so important. Thank you, Ashley, for asking that, because asking parents is one side of it, but asking the kids themselves who had these experiences and saw how their parents took care of these children, or what strengths and what resilience these preemies are showing when they're into their early adulthood and starting into their futures and such. So as part of this project, we're not particularly focused on that, but I know there's been excellent work that's been done from Dr. Suraj Segal that has looked into children that are now adults that were born preterm, and the way that they view themselves and how they really responded to any health conditions or any ways that they grew up, and what they could need in terms of resources is important too. And I think that when we're moving and trying to move forward, so we just look up until maybe the 18 months of age, but what comes after that, then the child is getting ready for school. So school and having the resources in school and going through all of the complex systems there. So it's one step of a huge puzzle that we're trying to work on. But I think also having the voices of preemies themselves is so important to identify what is needed and what really made them so resilient.
Absolutely. So we have one more comment here, or question, a comment. I'm sure you're aware of the COIN study, who followed the O5 procedure to find out what outcomes are meaningful. This study is a fantastic perspective of the parents. Congratulations. So thank you for joining us here, Jay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so Lindsay, any final thoughts on this study? Any comments you want to make so people are aware what is coming, what they should be tuned, and how you see this in the future? Because I feel like every time I'm in that meeting, I see a bright future for the preemies that will be coming. They will have a different, hopefully people have different perceptions of the outcomes of prematurity.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're just kind of laying the groundwork here and just getting this conversation going with parents, but also with the neonatologists and the developmental pediatricians, and telling them what's really important to be looking at, and how can we have these conversations with parents. So engaging with them and directing the conversation to what's most meaningful to them. And we have a lot of exciting work with our partnership with you and Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. This research project will be coming out as a blog written by a parent partner, and kind of really translating our research into something that parents can engage with in the blog platform. And I'm excited for that to come out in the next couple of weeks. And then we have the working groups working on this project and moving it forward. So lots to come in the fall, and we'll keep everyone updated through our social media channels as well.
Yeah, so I'm sharing here the website. Lindsay, what people can find on your website?
Yeah, you can find information about the Canadian Neonatal Follow-Up Network who's engaged. So we have different sites across Canada and which projects we're working on. We have a lot of data requests that go through there in terms of using the data that's collected. So there's a lot of information about who's engaged, who's involved, and what we're working on. So feel free to check that out.
That's great. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know you'll be back in September. Do you want to just give a little glimpse? What is the talk about in September? Like, it's also very exciting work.
Yes, absolutely. So that is another piece of this puzzle again. So this is the large study where we're looking at parents' classification within the different outcomes and categorizations. So this is a bigger study where we asked all parents across the network as they came into their visit, how they'd rank their child. And we compared that to see how it aligns with the current definitions. So stay tuned for that.
That is wonderful. Lindsay, thank you so much. I hope you have a lovely summer, and I see you again in September.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And to all of you watching us live today on our YouTube channel, Facebook, or Twitter, thank you so much for joining us here today. The video of today's session and all the videos from our live series are available on our website, which is the CanadianPreemies.org. And I want to thank our sponsor, AstraZeneca, for their ongoing support of our education sessions. And today's session is in collaboration with the FICARE, the Family Integrated Care Committee, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, and the Canadian Neonatal Follow-Up Network. And we are a charitable organization, and we believe that through support and education, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their babies. Please visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all our families. And I see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well.